Hey there! We're so excited to be here today to film another Exponent mock interview. I'm here today with Casey, a PM at eBay, to do a product strategy type mock interview. So, Casey, do you mind introducing yourself to those watching?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey. Really excited and looking forward to this mock interview. I've been working in product management for a little over 10 years now, and I spent the last several years in product management focused on AI experiences at companies such as Intuit, Uber, and currently at eBay.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So, why don't we dive into the mock interview right now? How do you approach Gen AI safety in consumer products?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's a great question. So I think in terms of answering that question, one of the very first things that I would look at and focus on is really trying to actually hone in on what makes generative AI unique from actual traditional AI. And I think one of the things that makes generative AI so unique compared to a lot of traditional AI that we saw several years ago was that generative AI is much more it's much more unpredictable than AI systems in the past. And I can give you a few examples of what I mean from that. So several years ago, when I worked on a lot of AI systems, generally speaking, you'd have a very good confidence and understanding in terms of what the actual outputs of your AI systems would be. You'd maybe not know like exactly what user input would match with a given output, but you would generally have a lot more control in the sense of what your AI system is going to actually deliver. Let's use an example here. So let's say for this example that we are trying to build a generative AI tool for, let's say, Amazon, and this is going to be like an e-commerce, a conversational tool that users could converse with and would help them shop on Amazon. The difference being is, so several years ago, if you were to actually develop this experience, you would likely end up using some type of like natural language platform. It could be like Google Dialogflow, it could be IBM Watson, but generally what you would do is with this type of platform is you would generally work with a team of data scientists and you would go through and you would kind of train this natural language processing model. This natural language processing model would use this training set that you've created. And when it gets a user input, it would look at the user input. And then based on the training set that you've actually come up with, it would know some type of like output that you likely pre-programmed into it to actually respond with. So generally speaking, before is, let's say you had a question that would help users about initiating a refund on Amazon. You would likely go and actually add like training phrases that would look like, so examples the way users would ask for that refund. If a user asks in a very similar way, the natural language processing would be able to look at it. Even if it was a little bit different than you've actually trained it, it'd be able to kind of evaluate some of those differences, come up with a confidence score. If the confidence score is high enough, it would end up matching to this output that you usually end up designated to say, hey, if the user matches with this intent for they want help with the refund, let's give them this answer on a refund. So it was much more defined historically in terms of the actual outputs, and you'd usually end up in some manner creating or programming those outputs in most cases. Where things get vastly different with generative AI is you think of how generative AI works right now. If and let's use our same example of Amazon. If you were to kind of create this conversational shopping system at Amazon, you're likely going to actually use you're going to use some form of large language model, maybe a large language model that you build in house. Maybe you're going to use something like an OpenAI or maybe like an Anthropic large language model, tune it. But you're going to use a large language model likely from the very start. Where things get much more different is from anyone who's spent a lot of time using large language models. There's a few very unique things. One is if you've used a large language model, I'm sure that you've encountered, you can ask ChatGPT the exact same question twice, and the answers will actually vary slightly. That's just a very unique thing with generative AI. The same question can be asked several times, and you can get a slightly unique answer every single time. Another thing that's very unique with generative AI that you would not see with traditional AI is that with generative AI and using these large language models and these foundational large language models, you basically are kind of opening yourself up to actually like the entire world of knowledge almost, or at least the entire world of knowledge from like an American standpoint. I know it's still kind of catching up in international markets, but it has this training corpus that can know and understand everything. So the point that I'm trying to actually get to here is that one of the main differences that with generative AI, you actually do not have the same level of control over the actual outputs that you would with traditional AI systems. With a traditional AI system, you're actually building this training set and kind of teaching the system how to match certain inputs with outputs that you've created. Now with generative AI and using that foundational model, you no longer have to do that, which is great, and it can raise your ceiling in terms of what you can accomplish in the product. But also, I would also argue that it can actually lower your floor. And what I mean by lowering your floor is I think it can actually open you up to more risk and more safety issues, which we'll talk through further. By again, because you no longer have that same level of control over the actual outputs that is going to come from the AI system. So it's just kind of one of the very first things that I would kind of look at and try and really ground myself in and understanding that. And I think that understanding and understanding the fact that you do not have the same level of control over the outputs with generative AI as you do that traditional AI from several years ago. And that's a really important understanding to have and to ground yourself in. I think if you have the understanding, it will really help guide you down the path of coming up with that proper strategy.
Exponent helps candidates ace their tech interviews with our online courses, peer mock interviews, and expert interview coaching. We publish new mock interviews every week, so be sure to like and subscribe. Yeah, makes sense. So, yeah, thank you so much for giving a primer on the history of the space and telling us your thoughts around the control level as well as explainability of current LLMs. So, how do you think about approaching Gen AI safety in consumer products? Let's use Amazon as a parent company in this
Mhm.
example. And how would you even define safety in this instance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me start with the first thing, which is in terms of how would I define safety in this instance? So let's use the Amazon case. I think there's a few ways that I would define safety. One of the ways that I would define safety um, is a few ways. So I'd say one, ensuring that with this generative AI system, and let's say for this example, we're developing for Amazon. Let's say again, it's like a conversational type of shopping experience. One of the aspects of safety is you want to ensure that we're not potentially exposing any of the users to any type of response from the generative AI experience that could potentially be, let's call it not safe for work in some manner, where it could be a situation where users are able to get this assistant to may say something that's inappropriate or racially biased, or kind of exposing them to any type of content or answers that could be generated by this generative AI tool that could be deemed inappropriate and not safe for work. That'd be like one aspect of safety that I would look at. I think another aspect as well, if you think of a lot of the generative AI tools, and I think we've all kind of seen it in the news and and kind of other reports that come out, and I think that OpenAI and others have gotten much better at making this hard to do. But there is the opportunity for people to actually go through and potentially use some type of generative AI tool for an actual malicious intent. Someone could potentially, figure out how to like inject certain code into a large language model, maybe provide it with if they have like sensitive user data for another person, and actually perform some type of malicious act that could potentially like harm like another individual or harm another business entity or performance. So I think that's another aspect of the overall safety. And I think the kind of third and final aspect that I would kind of view from safety, and this go back to this lens of looking at from like an enterprise standpoint, your company like Amazon that's using this generative AI experience. I think another aspect of safety that I would argue that like an enterprise like Amazon would have in this case, that maybe like OpenAI others may not have quite to the same strength in terms of using generative AI tools. But there's this aspect of safety, like you want to make sure that you're providing users with an answer and experience that's actually going to be as correct and accurate as possible. Let's say for the context again of this experience. So we're creating a generative AI experience that's going to help people shop on Amazon. You don't want an experience where your generative AI tool is potentially like providing like answers, responses to people that are completely false. Because in this case, I would argue that generally speaking, like I feel like consumers, if they're using a generative AI tool for in a given enterprise such as Amazon, that's in like an industry like Amazon's e-commerce, they're really going to have a higher bar for any of the answers that this generative AI tool could provide in e-commerce. So it's providing answers that are potentially wrong. It could be instance maybe someone ends up buying like an $8,000 watch or something on Amazon, and they end up buying it because they really trusted that answer. So I feel like for me, that's like another aspect. It's kind of a different aspect of safety, but it's really kind of preserving the overall like integrity of that consumer and what they're trying to actually execute on your, with whatever your business is. And with our case with Amazon, it's shopping. So that, I would argue it's another key aspect of safety is trying to really shield them from those hallucinations or any type of incorrect answers that you can sometimes see on ChatGPT that someone may actually take with more confidence on a platform like Amazon. And it could lead them to, maybe making a purchasing decision that they can't refund, and there could be, potentially, very severe consequences for the consumer. So kind of three different areas that will kind of define it. And I guess to kind of summarize again, one is just safety in terms of making sure that you're shielding the consumer from incorrect information. I would say the secondary safety again is not allowing them to potentially like interject with the generative AI tool or large language model, and potentially like engage in some type of malicious activity on someone else. And then the third piece would be shielding that consumer from any type of content that they could see that could be deemed not safe for work, inappropriate, could be racially biased, anything like that, but shielding them from any not safe for work content that they see. I think those would be the kind of like three areas that I would kind of look at, and that's kind of like the kind of three pillars in which I would define consumer safety with generative AI in this use case.
Yeah, those are certainly very interesting benchmarks. So why don't we talk more about how you would apply that to Amazon, especially for their consumer products?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of looking at, so let's think through each one first. So in terms of and I think some of these could actually be accomplished in like some of the features I'm going to recommend, some of the strategy I think could actually solve for multiple pillars at the same time. So I'll kind of highlight that as I'm going through this. But let's focus on initially. So let's first, let's focus on preventing users from actually seeing any type of like not safe for work content. In terms of coming up with this strategy, I think one of the things that is really important when you're dealing with a generative AI tool and you're really trying to actually conduct the safety is you almost want to spend as much, if not more time, focusing on what you do not want your generative AI tool to actually answer or to actually solve for. And what I mean by that, so let's go back to our Amazon example. So we're developing this generative AI tool for Amazon. Likely, like this is going to be something that's going to aid Amazon consumers as they're shopping on the Amazon platform. If someone were to potentially ask a question that's completely out in left field, like let's say they ask them like, who is the 33rd president of the United States or something like that, that's going to be an answer that's going to be completely off topic. I know that's kind of a very trivial example to give, but where I'm going with this is that as a product manager and a sample of a product strategy, I would try and come up with the strategies. How do we create the right guardrails and ensure that the actual consumers are kind of playing within the bounds of this generative AI tool that we want them to play in? And when you're determining those bounds, you really want to figure out like what are the actual use cases and what's those kind of bounds that you want your consumers to actually play within and engage within that actually provide meaningful value for them on your platform. So we think again to the Amazon use case. On ChatGPT, if someone were to go and ask who was the 33rd president of the United States or something like that, they would expect ChatGPT to actually come up with the answer. It's just the expectation they have. When you go to ChatGPT, you expect it to at least try to answer anything. There's not really any value in trying to actually answer that question if you're building a generative AI conversational tool for Amazon, because really answering that question isn't really going to help the consumer at all. Like on Amazon, that's not going to help them shop. That's not going to help them purchase something. They just kind of ask a very random question. So one of the things that I would do is actually try and come up with the scope and come up with a strategy of making sure that you can get consumers to actually play within the bounds of it. And there's multiple ways you can go through and do that. I know from my experiences and from a lot of the generative AI tools I've worked on, one way that you can do that is you see a lot of generative AI tools that can have like a multi-layer architecture. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, like let's say a user asks the question, what you can do initially is you can actually build your own kind of like classification layer, which would be like a traditional machine learning model that would look at what the user's asked and kind of evaluate with relative confidence um, what type of intent or like what type of question has the user asked. So if the users ask something about, let's say they ask something about, again, that who is the 33rd president of the United States, I would expect that classification model would classify that kind of intent or that question as not actually being relayed to the realm of shopping or e-commerce. And what you can do with that is in that case, you can circumvent and not even send that user question or that user intent to the actual large language model that you're using. You would likely probably send it to maybe some other like predefined service that you made. They'll probably come up with a response that says like, hey, sorry, like I'm not able to shop with, or sorry, I'm not able to help with that. I can help you with shopping on Amazon, and try and steer the user into the bounds that you're trying to actually get them to actually operate and conduct themselves within. One of the reasons why I think this is really important from a safety standpoint is now by not sending that response from the user to the actual large language model, we're helping to mitigate that risk that I talked about before, where it's very unpredictable in terms of how large language models can respond. Granted, this example that I gave is kind of very trivial because in most cases, if someone were to ask, about who a United States president was, they're probably going to get a relatively safe answer. They're probably going to get a relatively safe answer from the large language model, and you're okay. But let's say, for instance, someone were to say something to our generative AI assistant that we're building for Amazon, and let's say it had nothing to do with shopping. Let's say it contained like a lot of like potentially like racially insensitive remarks. It was just a very like hurtful. There are a lot of swear words. You don't know how the large language model is going to respond, and you would hope that the large language model will kind of respond and say like, hey, like that's really inappropriate, I'm not going to touch that. But you don't know. And there's that level of risk that like maybe the user could even try to, sometimes they'll try and trick a large language model to actually respond to something that's been said inappropriately with an inappropriate response. So by actually like identifying what the user has said first and trying to actually have that initial classification layer by saying, hey, is this actually in the bounds and does this actually align with the value that we're trying to actually drive from the product? And if it doesn't, let's kind of send it down a different path. You kind of like a tree diagram with like different paths that you send it down. Let's not even send that to that large language model because we're not going to provide any value to the user that's going to help them shop on Amazon, and it's not worth that risk. And again, I think that can kind of help with a couple of those pillars that I mentioned. I think that could be a very useful strategy again to help prevent users from seeing any like not safe for work answers. But I think as well, like that strategy can to an extent also help prevent scenarios where you're maybe like exposing to someone to any false information. I think the better you can identify like what are the actual questions that you want to be able to actually answer, like what are the kind of like topics that are within your bounds. And I'll talk about a little bit more later. I think there's more to it, but I think as well you can heighten to an extent. You can heighten to an extent the overall quality of your answers and ensure that you provide higher quality answers that are not going to contain misinformation. And again, that kind of like third pillar that I talked about, preventing anything malicious. I think as well, like this type of approach of coming up with like that multi-layer architecture and trying to actually figure out like whether or not the user is actually conducting themselves in a manner that's within the bounds of what you want your generative AI tool to engage with. That should also help with that kind of third use case I mentioned of users trying to like interject or throw off this large language model and get to actually like engage and kind of perform malicious acts on someone else, another individual, because they should look at generally in those cases someone's trying to like interject code or they're trying to like usually they're usually just having like very like off topic type of queries that you should as well be able to actually handle that classification there. So kind of a short one of the very early and I feel like important aspects of the strategies of product managers to really kind of figure like what's within scope and what's within bounds of this generative AI tool and what's going to actually deliver value to your consumers, and try and keep consumers within that. And if consumers are going to go out of bounds of the value that you can provide, I would, from my stance, to really help ensure safety for that consumer, I would come up again with some type of like multi-layered approach where you can handle them and handle those instances in a way that's much safer than actually sending them to a large language model and relying on that large language model and its human reasoning ability to
Sure.
actually determine how to handle that.
Yeah, that's helpful to hear your thoughts and appreciate you diving into the technical underpinnings of what's happening under the hood for AI products as it relates to safety. So let's dive more into the practical rather than the theoretical, right? So tell me three consumer products at Amazon you think would benefit from the incorporation of generative AI, and then walk me through how you would think about them from a safety perspective. And not all of them, just pick one of the three products and walk me through how you would think about it from a safety perspective. And feel free to take time if you need to brainstorm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like so like one of the tools at Amazon, I feel like that would definitely benefit from generative AI. Um, is I feel like so if you look at Amazon, with every product, there's a ton of Amazon reviews. I think one of the most challenging things can be to actually go through each and every one of those Amazon reviews. I think sometimes when I'm looking for Amazon reviews, I'm looking for an Amazon review that may answer a given question I have. So I feel like one great use case from generative AI is you could use a large language model and feed it access to all the content in the reviews for the items and allow someone to actually ask questions potentially about the overall content of those reviews. And the large language model and the generative AI tool that we're building would be able to actually leverage all the content that it sees and be able to kind of look through it and process it and see which of the reviews are relevant to your question, and then use the actual generative capabilities of a large language model to actually phrase that and respond and answer that. So I feel like that would be one of the use cases that would be really powerful. And I feel like as well, one thing that I would even look at doing at Amazon, I think Amazon does it a little bit to an extent today, but I think where you could make it even more powerful is to actually find a given category at Amazon. Let's say like electronics or something, where users can have very in-depth questions. A lot of times, they're looking for expert reviews. You could use like retrieval augmented generation and give it access to maybe like a lot of training data from very specialized training data from maybe like an electronics review syndicate or site, and really having that large language model generative AI tool fine tuned on it. So essentially, what we're creating in this case is we're kind of creating this conversational type experience where you could ask questions about a given product, and we would be able to kind of use two sources to answer those questions. We can not only use the actual reviews from Amazon customers, but like a high consideration category like electronics, we can actually cite reviews from actual expert syndicates who are not even on Amazon, be able to feed that into the user. So now as the user, you can actually see what have other shoppers said and what did the actual expert reviewers say, without having to potentially read through a ton of Amazon reviews and maybe go to actually CNET would be an example. So in this case, now getting back to your questions, now we kind of identify what we're going to build in terms of how I would approach generative AI safety in this case. Again, so what I would be looking to actually come up with in this instance is, again, the very first thing that we look at is coming up with an approach where, again, like that we're ensuring that we're keeping the user within like the overall bounds of what we're looking to actually help them with. So again, like what I would look at doing is probably having, again, like um, some type of ability to actually identify, okay, is the user truly asking a question that is relevant to this item? And if they're not asking something that's relevant to this item, let's not even send them to our large language model. Let's not even try and access the reviews. Let's not even try and access the information. That's one of the overall steps and strategies I would take. Another strategy that I would take as well with this is ensuring that, so we're thinking of the overall safety for the consumer. I think another aspect of it is, and trying to actually keep the user within the bounds of the questions that they should be asking. I would actually come up with ways that, depending on what a user asks, you could actually suggest to them like follow up questions. It's a great way to actually help someone understand like what they can ask and what they can actually ask this generative AI tool, and keeping them like within those bounds of like where you can provide that value. By kind of like showcasing them where they can actually play in it. I think that's something that would be very important. And those are two kind of basic pieces, but now thinking even beyond it. So if we think about this tool that we're building, again, there's multiple places where we're actually sourcing our information. We're going to potentially source the information that when users ask questions about product from like an expert third party syndicate. But we're also going to source it from the actual Amazon reviews. So one of the things that you want to make sure is that if you're going to potentially source something from an Amazon review, let's make sure that there's nothing inappropriate in that. I would imagine that Amazon probably has some ability already where they're ensuring that there's no vulgar language, that someone's not providing inappropriate personal information without any review. But maybe there's an instance where that has someone's gotten through that kind of layer of protection. Maybe there's something inappropriate in a review. I think that'd be very important to make sure that we have some mechanism or way that we can identify that when we are giving that large language model access to this review information. And then maybe a scenario where maybe you want to filter out that review or identify that a review is inappropriate in some manner or another. That's another thing that I would look at from a consumer safety standpoint in developing for it. I think finally, another aspect that would be really important is if someone's asking questions about product, just thinking through some other areas where you could potentially get into a problematic scenario. I think another instance too is in a potential risk with generative AI tools, or really like any AI tool, is the potential for some type of negative or consequential bias. So maybe someone's asking about a product, but maybe they're asking about a product in a way that's really inappropriate. Like maybe they're asking if a product's appropriate for like a certain racial group, or just something that is going to likely put this generative AI system or tool into a situation where it's going to have to kind of conduct some type of bias that would generally proceed as not being appropriate. I think that's another use case that you'd want to actually look for. And I've dealt with that before in generative AI systems. There's multiple ways that you can approach that. I think one really great way is you can actually come up with with actually explicit filtering. So if you see that someone's asking a question, you can just have certain words that you're just going to block out. So if people were going to potentially refer to racial identifiers, it could be inappropriate. If people are going to potentially use swear words, if someone could be asking about if they could potentially use this product for some type of violent purpose, you can actually we could come up with some type of explicit layer that would identify that and block that out and prevent it from going to our large language model, which again would prevent the large language model from coming up with an answer that potentially could have bias in it or be inappropriate.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you for your thoughts there. And so finally, how would you think about measuring success of this product or measuring safety as it pertains to this reviews-based product?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of in the generative AI tools and products that I worked on before, in terms of in evaluating our success and safety, usually one of the key things that a product manager is you have to do a lot of partnering. So I'd be partnering with the responsible AI team and actually coming up with you want to look at the potential levels of risk and actually classify them at a certain level. So I would argue that so if we're looking at the overall levels of risk, so one would be potentially let's say the one risk could be the user being exposed to some type of not safe for work content. I put that at the very top in terms of priority. As well, you have to think about too in our use case from Amazon, if this Amazon generative AI tool were potentially, get riled up by a customer and swear at them or say something inappropriate, that would be a PR nightmare as well for the company. It's just something that's not acceptable to expose customers to. So that'd be one of the highest priority risks. So you want to make sure that as you're going through and testing everything, that you almost want to have 100% confidence that you can actually prevent that from happening. And I kind of touched on it before, but then there's a lot of means that you can go through, from explicitly filtering out the potential content that the large language model could generate, or explicitly filtering out where users could say, where you can help accomplish that and get that to 100%. Another area that I look at in terms of evaluating the performance and where I prioritize it, again, if you look at someone being able to potentially interject, whether it's interjecting code or interjecting prompts or whatnot that could confuse the large language model and get it to engage in something that is potentially malicious. Again, I would deem that as one of the highest priorities, and you cannot allow that to actually happen. So again, working with the responsible AI team, work with the engineering team, being able to kind of manage and figure out, okay, what can we implement that we feel confident is going to actually prevent this at or near 100%, while also ensuring that we can meet our product goals. So I think really the exercise that I would go through, and I gave a couple of examples, but I go through and kind of look at all of the different area potential risks that you have and kind of prioritize them. You want to kind of come up with benchmarks as you're going through and testing. And like usually most companies now, whether it's the responsible AI team, sometimes they'll call like a red team, but they have teams that will go through and just kind of just do a lot of like mass and kind of bulk testing and send like thousands and thousands of kind of inputs and examples to your generative AI tool and see how it responds, which is great. But it's really on you as a product manager and work with the responsible AI team to kind of come up with those different areas of risk and kind of coming up with that priority and coming up with that kind of benchmark of like what's truly acceptable, like what percentage do we feel that we have to be able to handle on those, where we feel confident that we have an acceptable product that is safe enough for our consumers. So I'd say one of the kind of like last thing I'll touch on for that is from my experience, there's so much potential risk and there's so many different areas of risk and there's so many different ways that like safety concerns can actually sprout up with these generative AI tools that I would say it's really important to make sure that you're not trying to actually solve for all of them. So if you try to solve for all of them, it's going to be it's going to get incredibly painful. It's going to get incredibly difficult, and ultimately, I think you're going to end up in a scenario where you're just going to keep like delaying the overall launch of your product, and you're going to end up chasing this kind of perfect, like 100% perfection that, at least from my experience, is not really achievable right now, or I haven't seen it. And again, that's where I think as a product manager, coming up with identifying the different areas of risk and then prioritizing them and coming up with acceptable criteria is so important in this aspect of it.
Got it. Thank you so much, Casey. We can wrap the mock interview there. Awesome. So, first of all, I want to ask you, how do you think you did? Want to give me a brief self reflection, and then I'm happy to dive into positive and growth points.
In answering it, it's important to kind of make sure that the users understand like the differences from generative AI to regular AI in terms of the risk. But I feel like there's probably ways I could have maybe found to integrate it more with the rest of the answer, so it wasn't so much like this introduction and then getting into the actual use case and requiring users to actually kind of constantly flip back and forth. I feel like there could have been opportunities to more so intertwine that in the overall answer.
Awesome. Well, yeah, love your self reflection. And honestly, I would give yourself a pat on the back. This is a very hard question. This is a question that's evolving so rapidly in the landscape. And given that, I think you did actually a great job. But let me dive into the things you did well and then things that I think you can improve on. So,
Yeah,
number one,
absolutely.
yep. Number one, actually, you mentioned this in your self reflection too, but I actually thought you were very quick on your feet in thinking, right? So,
Okay.
every question I threw at you, you were able to remain calm, and come up with something that actually made quite a lot of sense, right? I'll get into the other side of that in a second, but I did love that you were prepared and obviously educated and on the history of the space and able to answer questions off the cuff. Number two, again, thought you were very well versed in the history of AI. It's very clear you've been working in this space for a long time. You have an incredible understanding of what it takes to build AI products, even mentioning terms like NLP, classification models, hallucination, training corpus, multi-layer architecture, RAG, right? Like things that demonstrate that you actually are well versed in the space and actually have put it into practice in the products you built too. So that's fantastic. And then number three,
Awesome.
it's always a great practice to talk to the interviewer about how you would navigate the PM job. So you consistently brought up, as a PM, I would think about trade-offs. As a PM, I would work with these teams. I would partner with data science, engineering, the responsibility teams, etc. Right? The better you can paint the picture that you already know what the job entails, you've been doing it for a really long time, and bringing those elements to even a strategic-oriented question, that was a masterclass in doing that sort of more behavioral underpinning of a strong performance for this type of question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
On growth points, so I think if I could summarize everything, I think this was a very strong interview from a behavioral perspective, but from a strategic perspective, I do think that stronger structure in the beginning and also tackling
Mm.
certain points would have been more effective. So let me
Yeah.
explain further what I mean by that, right? So number one, at the beginning, always make sure to clarify the question. When I ask you, how do you approach Gen AI safety in consumer products? There are many phrases in there that you could poke more into, right? Generative
Mm.
AI, what do we mean by that? Are we doing text models? Are we doing image models? Are we doing video? Like what type of generative AI? And then maybe define it a little bit, right? So that we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
When it comes to consumer products, right? Like what are we talking about here? And thankfully, we were able to use Amazon as the sort of guiding principle here. But if it's too amorphous, then that could lead to a less strong performance. But again, I like that you brought in Amazon as an early example, and we rolled with that. Number two is I would have liked to, similar along the lines of being more strategic, right? I would have loved to see some more questions, especially when we honed in on Amazon around how we could build specifically for this company or think about safety specifically for this company, right? Because I think a lot of
Hmm.
your answers were more general, building safety into Gen AI products. But for example, why is AI crucial to Amazon's strategy? What are their goals and their missions? Who are their users, right? Their buyers, their sellers, their advertisers. I think you immediately went into the main search experience, but there's so many other products in their ecosystem, like their warehouses, the hardware like Alexa, their private label line, their media business, right, like Prime Video. There are so many areas that Gen AI could have touched, and safety looks like different things in a warehouse, right? Where
Hmm.
safety is probably a lot more critical than someone watching the latest Mr. Beast games or something like that, right? So that's something
Yeah.
I want to pay attention to. And then
Yeah, I
finally,
agree.
I would say beyond just the basic understanding of terminology and what it takes to build an AI product, this is more like cherry on top type of feedback. But if you can bring in how you've studied up on the industry or any latest current events, right? Like one example
Hmm.
could be actually Amazon already has this. It's called Rufus AI, and so bringing in this terminology or even talking about like different large language models or models in general that have popped up, right? Like new reasoning models like DeepSeek that have completely overturned the industry. If you were able to set that up in the beginning, right? Like, I'm going to tell you about the context of AI within Amazon. I'm going to tell you about their goals and their missions. I'm going to tell you a bit about their users, and then let's dive into a product where I think that we can build a lot of great safety features into it from a Gen AI perspective, right? So if you,
Yeah.
I think that's what I was trying to mention earlier, where you're very quick on your feet and thinking, but that could almost be a detractor, right? Where you actually do want to take a step back and think a little bit and structure your thoughts before diving into the question. Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
But yeah, in
makes
summary,
sense.
I thought again, it was really strong performance from just a composure, presentation, and behavioral standpoint. But I do think if you were able to have more structure, especially as it relates to a strategic lens of Gen AI safety, it would have taken you to the next level.
Yeah. No, thank you. I definitely agree. That's yeah, I kind of feel the same way about it. So
Perfect.
thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Casey, and thank you to everyone watching. If you enjoyed this interview, visit tryexponent.com to view our PM interview course, where you'll have access to our library of interview questions, expert coaching, and peer to peer mock interviews where you can practice yourself. Good luck on your next interview, and thanks for watching.